Well, we're about to hear from someone who was a keynote speaker back in 2019, in those old-fashioned days when we could meet in person without a hand wash and a mask and social distancing. And I was so glad that he flew in from Norway for it, because his speech was brilliant. Unfortunately, it was also terrifying because he pulled absolutely no punches in making clear just how urgent the issue of climate change is to us all. And before you hear what he has to say today, let me just give you a few highlights about the man himself. He is the founding chief executive of the world's largest sovereign wealth fund, Norges. He's a member of the supervisory board of APG Asset Management. He's a member of the advisory committee to the Monetary Authority of Singapore and the Central Bank of Thailand. And until recently, he was also part of the China Investment Corporation and Government of Singapore Investment Corporation. He was the president of the Riskmetrics Group in 2009 to 2010. He was the chairman of the board of CICERO, the Centre for International Climate and Energy Research in Oslo. He was a member of the working group that drafted the UN Principles for Responsible Investing between 2005 and 2006, and he's currently a partner at FSN Capital. So I'm delighted and exhausted to welcome back Knut Kjaer. Good morning, how are you?
Thank you, Adrienne. Very nice to be invited by you again and to address your great audience.
Well, is it fair to say that even more than when we spoke last time, you spend a huge amount of your time devoting it almost exclusively to becoming an evangelist for investment strategies that will improve the trajectory of climate change and its effects on all of our areas?
Well, I hope to contribute. So that's what I will try now as well.
Okay, well, I'll hand over to you to do your presentation now then.
Thank you. And that is about how asset owners, investors, can contribute to the green transition. That is the most important part to fight global warming. We know that it's possible to stop the greenhouse gas emission by 2050 and hopefully keep the temperature to not go very much above 1.5 degrees. That requires a full transformation of the energy system, renewables replacing fossil fuel, electrification, and also more energy efficiency. It will cost, estimated to about $2 trillion annually, to move into the net zero path compared to the path we are at just today. So what I will discuss with you is how can investors combine contributing to this green transition and ensure that their end beneficiaries get a long-term decent stream of real cash flow. The climate panel of UN is very clear in the conclusion. Massive report coming out in August last year and again in February now, supported by 195 governments, thousands of researchers working on this, 10,000 of articles being referred to and applied. It's no room for fake science here. It's no room for arguing that this is not a man-made catastrophe in way of happening if we are not acting quite soon. And in the last report, the window for changing the course is approaching. Maybe we have not more than 10 years to change the course. 3/4 of the greenhouse gas emissions is coming from the energy sector. and it's about energy sector the rest of my presentation is. To go down to net zero emission from the energy sector, it's calculated in different scenarios that the contributions will come 25% from replacing oil and coal, gas with renewables, solar and wind mainly. 25% will come from more energy efficiency. 20% from electrification. That is, for example, electrical vehicles. About 10% from hydrogen, and some from carbon capture and storage. So it's doable. It's a mix of measures needed to be taken. For renewables, solar and wind, this is about much more than doubling, 3, 4, 5 times of today's building of capacity to at 2050 reach the level needed. And if successful, solar and wind will deliver 68% of the energy demand that year, compared to 9% now. And to illustrate the size of this challenge, in this scenario, we need to build a new solar park every day of the same size as the biggest solar park we have on the planet today. Behind this, we need investments. And we also see that we have a demand for quite much more capital to do these investments. 2 trillion, I think, annually will be the increase from where we are without changing the course. $2 trillion a year in addition for investments. That's quite a lot, of course, but it's not more than 2% of global GDP, 7% of global investments, and less than 2% of the global equity market and also bond market. Now I will drill in on offshore wind and the potential. This map from the World Bank illustrates where we have potential. Dark red means much wind, much electricity to be gained. Northern part of the world, Northern America, Northern Europe, also East Asia, Japan, Korea, down to China, south part of Southern America, and also Australia. Here we have very big potentials. I will give some examples. East of England, about to be built, is the ocean wind park Dogger Bank, 3.6 gigawatt capacity, 11 billion in investment. This alone will give or provide the electricity for 6 million homes in England. Significant contribution to the supply of energy in England, and it's totally renewable. And here, for the North Sea, in total, the potential is 450 gigawatt. That is 60 projects of the Dogger Bank type I showed you. So all this will not be realized, but the potential here is to cover the demand for electricity for all countries with border to the North Sea. That also includes Germany. The third example is east of New York, where it recently was auctioned 6 areas for developing ocean wind farms. Stiff competition, more than 4 billion in revenue to the state there. But they will also have massive expenses to build infrastructure on land needed and to build supports and also other equipments needed to facilitate the construction work on those 6 areas. By the way, mentioning the need for onshore work, in all these scenarios from International Energy Agency, World Bank, and so on, we see a huge potential for good jobs and rising employment. Why should long-term investors focus on these potential long streams of real cash flows? It can provide better return than government bonds without high risk in real terms for the really long haul. It also gives opportunity to participate in other parts of the capital structure, equity financing, taking part in building projects, taking more risk there, venture type like investments, and so on. Investors should also do this because it is the right thing to do. We have a responsibility for the future, how life will be for future pensioners in pension funds, that it's still a civilization, and that we try to control the devastating impact of irreversible changes in the weather systems with floods and wildfires and heat waves and all that. This graph illustrates how $139 billion in investment in European wind farms can be financed. Much can come from corporations like oil companies, utilities, much also from commercial financial institutions. That will also include the bond financing. Less than 10% is expected to come from institutional investors. To me, that is a very low number. I think it should be much higher, because this is, as I have described, a perfect investment opportunity for long-term investors. Now on to some examples of pension funds going into large wind farm projects. 4 or 5 years ago, 2 Danish pension funds, PFA and PKA, they bought 25% of a UK wind farm. Significant investments for those 2 pension funds. The Dutch pension fund APG, that is managing pensions for ABP, biggest pension fund in Europe, and other Dutch pension funds. They bought last year a Swedish wind developer, Vasa Wind, that has a pipeline of wind projects of a significant size, but also have the operation of existing wind farms. The third example is the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, Norges, that last year bought a 50% stake in the second largest wind farm project in the world, that is on the coast of the Netherlands. But even investors are not taking direct part in such projects. They take part in financing the energy transition by being invested in the equity and fixed income markets. For example, those just applying index strategy in the international equity market contribute also to the energy transition. And the dynamics in the market is that the sunset industries, like fossil fuel companies, they pay out large dividends, and that dividend is reinvested into emerging companies that also are companies in the green transition, and that are growing and becoming bigger part of the index. So the role for funds doing index management of their assets is to be active owner of the assets and ensure that those sunset industries actually pay out dividend. Instead of investing in new fossil fuel plants, they should pay back the capital to their investors, and their investors take that capital and invest into renewable energy and other growing businesses. It has been done by some investors to flatly leave investing in fossil fuel, divest from coal, divest from all oil companies. In this quite busy slide from International Energy Agency, it's explained that many of the oil companies, they are expanding beyond the traditional oil and gas industry. They transition into energy companies. And actually, some of the companies like Shell and Total that have decided to be very active here, they are creating innovative technology, and they are pursuing investments of a significant size. So to divest from those companies means that you are supporting less the green transition. Investment opportunities also, of course, to invest in green bonds. I expect many of the projects we are looking at here will be partly financed by issuance of green bonds. Today, the green bond market is not very big compared to the total bond market. But here we get the underlying investments of a size that also I think will be important for developing this market. And then we are not doing enough. If you look at this graph from a Financial Times article quite recently, we have a quite big shortfall between what is needed to come on the net zero pathway and what actually is planned, that are the blue lines here for solar and for wind. We are lagging behind. And we are in a situation now, especially in Europe, where we need to be independent of supply from Russia because of the aggressive war against Ukraine, the war crimes, and so on. I cannot imagine that in the time of ESG investing, so important the consideration about how we invest, the purpose of the companies, the values of the companies. In this time of ESG investing, I cannot imagine that the Europeans will continue and voluntarily buy energy from such an aggressor state. And that means we really need to boost the investing in solar and wind farms. As I showed you, we have all the potentials, but we lack speed in the planning and realization of the projects. And I think we will have the capital also from long-term investors. So I will end my introduction here by saying that we see an enormous amount of projects coming up, potential projects that can be developed, that could be wonderful investment opportunities for long-term investors, provide the long-term stream of real cash flows with controllable, quite low risk, and at the same time do good to contribute to the energy transition. My message, key message here is that I think the long-term like-minded investors should cooperate and not compete. As we see today, it's quite stiff competition against each other in some of the projects to get financing, taking the return down. The world we're looking at here, large offshore wind projects, large solar projects, that is incredibly complicated. And each project really big in size. So here we need funds to cooperate, to build competence together. We need funds to bid together and not compete. And I think if funds are successful in building partnerships for active participation in the green energy on large projects, those partnerships could be an important force with capital promise into early phase of projects that can be attractive for project developers, but also can ensure the investors that they get a fair share of the return potential in an early phase. So this is my introduction. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Knut. I mean, there's so many important themes there that you've raised. I'm not quite sure we're going to have enough time, but we'll give it a shot. You talk about collaboration to an industry which is naturally competitive. So how do you win that argument, or how do we win that argument that says we are greater together than we are individually? Where does it start?
Yeah, I think it starts in one or two boardrooms of really large investors that see that it's very demanding to build internally this competence. And instead of playing a minor role in some projects, joining forces with 1, 2, 3 other could make a difference. You could build this base of competence. You could be a more reliable, interesting partner for those developing projects. And if a few is starting and building a partnership, I think it's possible for others to join later. But this is a kind of combining business and purpose. I don't think it's possible to just say, let's come and build a club together. It must be some business principles guiding it as well.
Yeah, I think that the problem is that you're asking people to abandon their natural human behavior and their corporate established historical behavior of let's look after us and worry about somebody else. But this challenge with climate change is bigger than any individual competition, right?
Yeah, you know, that is the big vision here, that this must be done. and the path we are on is not sufficient to ensure the stabilization of the temperature and control the climate risk. So we have to think differently than we are used to. And this is in one area where we must be and must behave different.
Well, going back to your slides, I had a note here that slide number 18, I'd like to have a little look at if we can bring it back up again, because you talk about investors should actively engage and in their investments. Who do you direct that to, and what does active mean in that context? Is it about divestment? Is it about shareholder power? What is it?
No, yeah, you know, the traditional ESG investing is long, and we have been through all aspects of it, like exclusion, that was early on. The easy way out is to just exclude. And when we started drafting the UN PRI, that was a key point. We had in Norway our fund changed from exclusion to more active engagement, and that became also the key feature of the UN PRI. So engaging it means here that for the fossil fuel companies, that you both try to enforce capital discipline, that they don't waste capital into new fossil projects where there is a risk of those becoming stranded assets. You need to be much more cautious going into such projects. So be active and tell companies to give the money back to investors rather than spend on marginal fossil projects. But also be active to get the traditional energy companies to go green, as we see some of the oil companies are doing. And I mentioned to you Shell and Total. There are other examples also, like the Norwegian Equinor. So I think it's a huge space here for active engagement where investors can make a difference.
So on that slide 18 that I was hoping would appear, the dots behind the different activities, some are solid blue and some are half and some are completely clear. What does that mean? What does it indicate?
The dark dot means that they have activity.
Oh, okay.
And if you look at the right part of the table, and you look that is moving into energy company, that means trying to become green. You see American Exxon with only white dots. That means they don't try. Wow. And you see the mentioned Shell and Total with black dots. They try. And investors should see the difference, and investors should take that into account when they make their investment decision, and also when they plan active engagement.
Given the urgency that we're all under, why do you think the issuance of green bonds has been so modest? Because you would think that that's a no-brainer. Let's go there. That's where the future is.
Yeah, but you know, it takes time to build new markets.
But we don't have time. You just said we don't have time. What are we going to do?
Yeah, but you know, it's a combination of getting used to it, getting used to the certification system, get the trust also that is really green and not just greenwashing. And it has maybe been lacking a large investment project that is clearly green. And here I present to you, it will come a huge stream of projects that will require financing, and green bond will be a part of that financing.
And then on slide number 21, you talked about governments auctioning off ocean wind areas, which kind of blew my mind. I didn't know you could auction off the wind, and I didn't know you could identify the wind connected to the ocean, and that the government had the right to divide the pie and say you can bid for this. So please enlighten me on that.
Yeah, that is what I did recently, east of New York, 6 areas, and writing down the rule, setting up a room, have a day for admitting bids, and so many bids coming in from consortiums that were developers together with energy companies and so on. So it was a stiff competition for each of the 6 areas. But the problem, the good thing here is we like competition and private, efficient market and so on. I'm not so sure about this system is creating the security we need for those areas to be developed. For those putting in bid, they pay a high price, but still a very low price compared to the total cost. And it may be that they decide not to build. So what will happen then? So the alternative is to say that the state, like here US, and states in US decide that we build these 6 areas, but we put out tenders not for doing everything, but only for parts of it.
Right.
Then it's the government that ensure that this will be built, and then you will have bidders more in specialized areas, like the construction work, like generators, and so on. They will face more security, need to charge a less risk premium, so you can get better total price for it, and you get 100% security that this will actually be built. So this is another way of doing it. But I have to you a slide deck that is many more slides than what I have presented now. And you see from the appendix illustration of different ways different governments do this. And you also see it's extremely complicated. It's so it differs from country to country. Being a long-term investor and you want to access this to make a difference and get the real cash flow, you really need to build much competence to uncover this complexity. And to me, that's a key reason for long-term investors to join forces together.
Well, it seems that long-term investors would put the money in, but the question is where you get the will to collaborate on such a huge scale within the actors, within countries, within regions, within cultures, within diversity, to come together at this perfect storm of a moment and do what they need to do. And that seems to me quite surprising that we have this, which challenge do we deal with first? We can get the money, but we can't agree what to do with it. We can do something, but that's not the same as somebody else is doing. How do we bring this all together and pull those strings together so that we get a cohesive, effective plan to drive the change that you're talking about?
Yeah, so it's good, Adrienne, that you have a great audience here. So everybody need to take part in this. I don't think I have much more to say. This is so important. We all need to be around and give the message. And we have got a wake-up call from Russia now about the need for building independence. That adds to the urgency and maybe can be turned to something positive. even the weeks now is really depressing when we see what's unfolding.
It's horrendous. It's absolutely, and it's come up several times throughout the day, so and I'm sure it will again too. If there was one thing you could ask this audience to do as we sign off, what would that one thing be?
To be around and talk the message that the green transition, it's possible. It demands much more capital, but it also demands more active governments and good planning. And we all need to push the buttons where we can to make it happen. Because as communicated so clearly in the last UN climate panel report, we don't have many years to change the course.
And it seems to me that we also need a bigger ambition when you talk about the need to increase solar panel energy by 4 or 5 times, I think you said at the start. So to take the biggest one that we've got and then multiply that by 4 or 5, and that's still not going to be enough. And that's just for right now. The challenge is enormous, but it seems to me that there are equally sized opportunities as well for those people who are prepared to commit and are brave enough and get on with it.
It is. And this is also about the mentality, the willingness to face change. And the change means more good jobs, not less.
Well, the interesting thing is about COVID, not that there's really much been good about it, but we've learned that we can do things differently. You know, that when you came to us in 2019, you had to fly in, you were on your way somewhere else, and there was this, that, and the other to organize. Here we are now. I assume we're in your house and you're in my house, and we're not burning up we've got no carbon footprint. We're having this conversation. We're able to discuss, debate, and whatever. It's not just a series of flat presentations. So I think the world is learning that we need to do things differently, and we can do things differently.
And the climate crisis is like the COVID crisis, but in slow motion. It's about survival.
Yeah. Well, it's absolute, isn't it? It's absolute. Knut, as ever, you've given us all an awful lot to think about, not to sleep well, but a lot to think about, and I'm very grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and have a good rest of the conference.
Thank you.